Irina, let's get the snowball rolling with you. I'll go to the ambassador just next. The vice president says that there is a lot of fraud, is what he calls it, in the system. How real and how widespread is this problem really? Are we looking at isolated abuse? Are we looking at systemic loopholes? And what should New Delhi be taking away from this?
Well, thank you so much for asking this question. I think J.D. Vance should have specified exactly what percentage of cases are found to be fraudulent. I'm sure that data exists, and I think there is a good reason why he chose to use abstract terms. First, he probably doesn't know, he probably didn't bother looking up how many of these fraud cases are actually being pursued by the US. Second,
he spoke highly of his in-laws, Irina. I think he would have looked it up, considering the kind of questions he's been facing with H-1B visa and, of course, the lineage of his own spouse.
So that implies that if he does know, he prefers not to say, because when you say a lot, you can imagine any number. Whereas if you have a specific data, it may not appear as high as he makes it claim. There's a couple of things disturbing about his comments. One, he seems to assume that it's the nationals, people who have immigrant background, who are giving preferential treatment to other people from their countries of origin. There's no basis to make such statement unless, again, he has specific numbers in mind. Arguably, it's actually people like Elon Musk, meaning huge businesses who benefit from massive importation of cheap labor, who are much more likely to abuse the system in that way. Another issue that's really concerning is that he makes it sound like the fraud is uniform across all industries, and H-1B visa is equally used across all industries. It is not the case. There are some industries where there is a lack of American talent. There are not enough qualified American workers, period. With or without fraud, there are just not enough people who are qualifying for specific types of industries, and he doesn't mention the fact that that's a very real disparity in skills that we're facing, and it's a growing problem. And in some industries, yes, it may be more competitive, and it may be that some employers are looking for cheaper, lower cost labor, but we also have a growing problem.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Irina, because this shift towards higher wages, this shift towards a stricter vetting process, does this genuinely protect American workers? I mean, we've been talking about how the entire setup and the entire tech dominance, it's been built on immigrant labor. But does this genuinely protect American workers, or does it risk hurting innovation by shrinking that talent pool?
Quite frankly, I think if J.D. Vance were concerned about protecting American workers, he'd be pushing for better American training, better skills-based education, and better training for early positions, which tend to have lower salaries. Unfortunately, we are seeing a pool of candidates that are simply unqualified for their jobs and expect very high starting salaries in exchange for very relatively low skill set. And I think that kind of demand disparity is what's driving many companies to try to save and import foreign workers.
What's the sentiment on the ground, Irina? What's the sentiment on the ground? You're joining us from New York. What's the understanding over there? Critics argue that H-1B visa has been used to replace American workers, but what's the ground sentiment there? I know that New York is a melting pot of people from all walks of life.
I think there are very few companies that are going to risk immigration enforcement or some sort of a issue with the government just to discriminate against American workers. I think at the end of the day, most companies, even in competitive industries such as IT, are simply looking out to save money, to grow their businesses, and to give opportunities to everyone who's qualified without having to overpay, and it's always a balance of financial interest. And I think most people understand that. Of course, there are cases where some people will deliberately ignore American applicants, but those cases can be easily tracked. And I think if they're importing underqualified workers, or abusing the system to underpay people from India or from any other country, that's also relatively
I think there are
easy,
always going to be
to
people who
see.
are going to be abusing the system. That's the same instance in pretty much everything that we do in life.